Welcome to Estate Planning Weekly. I initially launched this podcast as a real estate agent. I really was on a soapbox to make sure we as realtors and financial professionals don't just do a transaction, but help our clients prepare themselves in the long run for things that can come up. Estate planning be so central, but within estate planning, there's so many different niches, and one of them that we want to talk about today, we really have an expert on, attorney Andrew Atherton, on the subject of special needs planning. Andrew, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Bill. I'm excited to be here.
So of all areas of law, how did you get involved with special needs estate planning in particular?
I kind of fell into it in the legal field. You don't sort of jump out of or specialize within law school typically. And coming out of law school, I was working for a small firm doing family law, divorces and child custody and things like that. And that was a tough road. It was not a practice that I really enjoyed all that much, to say the least, and decided to kind of look for other opportunities. And in a boutique firm in Greensboro, where I was living at the time, had an opening for a special needs elder law attorney, and I thought, well, why not try this? And it was a perfect fit. It's got a lot of, you're helping families that have a lot of complicated dynamics within it. And so there's a fair amount of social work related to maybe the legal field. You're looking at not just, solving one particular legal issue. You're really kind of looking at their entire family situation and dynamics, and working through a little bit of a sort of social work type atmosphere. And I'd sort of really get invested with sort of helping people, and it was just a great fit.
Wow. Well, I do think that anytime we can be more holistic in our approach to solving customers' problems, right? For me as a real estate broker, I could just sell the house, but if I notice title's name, at least in California, of the individuals and not an estate plan, then at least I should ask the question, hey, have you considered? Have you thought about? If I notice they have kids who are special needs, have you thought about that there's some special issues and you should maybe consider? Not that's my job to force them, but at least ask the question. If I care about them, why would I not at least make sure they're aware of that? And that's why I have this podcast. And you bring up a fascinating point. In law school, you said they don't really push specialization. If I was on the national board of law schools, I'm not. Nobody's asking me to help out there. I would make people specialize in something, just like engineers specialize in one discipline of engineering. I think history majors pick a particular focus on their history. I think every attorney I know who enjoys the practice, does well successfully, has a good reputation, has a narrow specialty, and maybe they bleed into holistically other areas. But I just think that's so important. And for us, as when we look for attorneys, we should be finding people who specialize in these areas to get the better service for clients rather than just a generalist. So talk a little bit about how your time, delving deep in this topic. And I don't want to be immodest about it, but as a real estate agent, I don't want to take a special needs situation to just any attorney who legally could write an estate plan. I want somebody who specializes in this. Talk a little bit about the differences of your experience versus somebody maybe who just does general estate plans.
Yeah, I think there's just, there's a dramatic difference between sort of general practitioners, and it's almost gone out of style. You find that there are general practitioners that happen in some small towns and things like that because they just have to sort of broaden their focus. But it becomes very difficult, particularly in the special needs planning niche, because the rules are so complicated and varied. We're talking about not only state law, we're talking about an overlay of federal law, and those aren't all sort of court cases and statutes, but there's regulations, and there's, not only just even regulations, they're each, sometimes in sort of the benefits planning realm and dealing with government benefits like Medicaid, and then you've got and housing related things, housing benefits. You've got sometimes even county specific like regulations and rules, and how those are get interpreted by your particular county. So you have to stay very sort of if you're not laser focused on the area and communicating consistently with colleagues in sort of that area, you're not communicating with caseworkers and those folks sort of interpreting the rules and sort of overseeing qualification, then if you're not doing that communication on a very consistent basis, then you may be missing changes that may be minute,
Right.
but have an enormous impact on what happens with the plan. So one example of that is that in North Carolina here, we have a number of different exclusions related to real estate in a lot of Medicaid sense, but each county interprets that exclusion differently. Some counties let it happen so that joint with right of survivorship real estate is excluded, and some interpret that to only be tenants in common real estate. And in North Carolina, those two things are dramatically different and deal dramatically, are handled dramatically different. When somebody passes away, joint with right of survivorship becomes owned by the surviving owners, and tenants in common interest passes down to heirs. And that gets interpreted different ways by different counties even. And just knowing other lawyers across the state that specifically do this, and we have a listserv that's pretty active, and hearing what's happening in each county, it takes a lot of effort to stay up on that information. And I think if I were a general practitioner, it'd be really hard to try to do, family law, criminal law, all of those things, and still stay up on the small detail that's happening in some county that, I don't often speak to.
It's so true. I'm not an attorney, I'm a real estate broker, but I'm an affiliate member of the LA County Bar, and I belong to the listserv for the estate planning section. It's a way for me to learn. I see attorneys ask questions, and I get to see the answers in some cases. And sometimes you'll see somebody who obviously doesn't do estate or trust law ask a question, and the way they pose it, you think, oh, I hope that's not my client who's calling them, because, I'm glad they're getting advice and mentorship and help on one hand. On the other hand, this stuff is very complicated, and it does vary by county. And one small example, it's interesting in San Bernardino County. If you have a probate hearing for authority, you submit the order ahead of time, the judge approves it, and they'll print it out, and the judge will just pull it out, sign it, and hand it back to you. LA County, they'll disregard anything before the appointment hearing date. You have to then, after the hearing, submit the order. Then the judge gets to it. If it's right, then the judge signs it. It could be 2 weeks. So good practices in San Bernardino is bad practice in LA County. And you say, well, why would that be so different? Two different guys run, or two different people run two different organizations. And so you have different counties. And that's why it's so important to have an attorney, I think, that works in a county, to avoid these kind of problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very similar, and you see that kind of across the board, particularly in areas of the law that have so many different overlays of rules and regulations and statutes and case law.
Right.
All of those things are a good place to sort of miss something, or,
I would think that estate planning, as it relates to special needs, that in terms of business development, that your business either doesn't come from other attorneys, so that's tough sometimes to get them to acknowledge their other area, or maybe wealth planners or people who deal with people's wealth. Where in your case, if you're able to describe, what's the source of business that drives your referrals of business into your practice?
Yeah, so I mean, primarily we're getting business from referral sources, and it can be anything from you know, CPAs, wealth planners, other lawyers are, pretty good drivers of business, and
Mhm.
particularly in it when it relates to like special needs planning, um, elder law work, because I think folks recognize that it's complicated and hard to, you know, they're worried and nervous about doing those things. We do get a fair amount of referrals and business from real estate agents, and I think it's right. I think it's important that you see your clients as like whole people,
Mhm.
and make sure that they're, you know, getting advice as to what they should be looking at least issue spotting, helping to issue spot a little bit for them, and send them into a good direction. Um,
I know you've been at this a while and have a pretty good following. So I'm not sure how much time you spend still doing business development versus business coming in based on your reputation. But for attorneys that are looking to develop more business in this area, what are the activities? Like, how is it you get attention from fellow attorneys or wealth managers or accountants or real estate agents? What are the things that you do besides my podcast, which is the best source of free marketing nationally? What are the things that you do or see colleagues doing that are effective in positioning themselves not as too salesy, right? Because attorneys, they're turned off if it's, hey, I'm the best, estate planning attorney for special needs. They don't want to hear that, but they are looking for the best attorney in special needs. So how do you handle that?
yeah, so I mean, the things that tell young lawyers or even lawyers that are looking to move into this practice, even if they're not so young, is some of the best ways is get involved with your sort of elder law bar, either that's through like your local or your state bar, your local bar. If there's a elder law group or section of that bar, that's a great opportunity to sort of get involved with meeting attorneys doing your practice around the state,
Right.
and getting involved with groups even nationally, like the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys or the Academy of Special Needs Planners. Those sort of groups are good even from a national perspective to both gain knowledge um, and to sort of meet folks that could potentially be referral source type folks. And then I think getting involved, a lot of times with like local bar for referral type things. And then, if we're any aside from sort of referral type sources, we do a fair amount of speaking, not necessarily offering sort of the free lunch or dinner in order to do like more of a sales marketing, but we'll do a lot of sort of just information sessions, similar to like this to churches, nonprofits, those groups that help folks with disabilities and things like that.
Churches to me seems so natural for this in that, you know, not that they want to change necessarily people's plan, but there's so many people who feel committed to their church or in my case, some Jewish synagogue. And, if they had a way to automate that process, their desires and turn them into a legacy, they would, and you can't with a proper estate plan. And if you don't have a estate plan, you're going to lose a lot of it in overhead on top of not get what you want. I remember during COVID, when we had when I took my wife to get a vaccine, and there was this huge church in LA. When I say huge, it was like a stadium. There were like, I don't know, 5,000 parking spots, and we're lined up like 8 lines, 20 deep. And I remember thinking, if you could have like an estate plan template and get all these people signed on, but I see so much wealth lost through the process. That was kind of thing. One of the things that drew me to the podcast was, I think churches and in general, charities are such a great opportunity for promoting estate planning, which is not, hey, give us more money, but really, hey, if your plans to give us more money, here's a way to do it, and a way to do it effectively and in peace. One of the topics I wanted to ask you was, I'm sure there's more elder law requirements as our population gets older physically and then mentally has declines. Special needs, it seems like that's just exploded in terms of for whatever reasons medically, that we have more and more people who have very special needs, or we're better identifying them, I guess, one or the other for sure. So these numbers are growing. One of the areas that I see that have to grow with it and is fiduciaries, because oftentimes the parents don't have somebody to take care of the child. And I just did a case recently with a elderly man who he only had one child. The child didn't really want to help him. He really needs an attorney he trusts. They really need a fiduciary because he just can't physically sign the papers to sell the house. Do you see that as an increasing requirement in your practice? I don't see enough people entering that business. I try to encourage people. I have a good friend who I helped get into it. Tell me about the role of fiduciaries in special needs planning and elder law planning.
I mean, we see that as like a big issue, big area in which there's significant need. But because you're right, there's the baby boomer population is actually retiring,
Right.
like we're seeing, and they're all sort of aging and needing help and assistance and things like that. And we're seeing a lot of those folks that either for one reason or another, either don't have family members to help in naming as things like powers of attorney or trustees under trust, and or just don't have family members that they would necessarily trust to name in those positions. And so that sort of, along with the fact that a lot of the local banks, at least in North Carolina, that have traditionally served as trustee role for folks have gotten consolidated and gobbled up by groups like Wells Fargo and things like that. And so our local trust folks have moved to big behemoths that don't really want trust for less than $2 or $3, $4, or $5 million to manage. And even in those numbers of 2 to 5 million, they're pushing things to call centers and things like that. And so it's hard. There are some, we've identified some like local regional type trustees that still are kind of operating. But one of the things that we did as a law firm is about 1.5 years ago is that we've actually hired a lawyer, and she's built out a team of paralegals that we will operate as power of attorney and trust for individuals. As planners, we are careful to not necessarily sort of just tout our services as like a sales type thing. We want to sort of draft from an independent perspective, but we felt like we were getting so many people asking, hey, wouldn't you do this?
Yes.
That we just needed to say, yes, we'll figure out how we will do this. And so we're new at how this is working. In fact, we had about 4 weeks ago a whole day in which we were trying to reestablish our operating procedures and things like that to sort of, further reduce the cost to people for those services. But it has definitely been an area in which we're seeing struggle. And you're right, when we mention that we're operating as trustee, we often get lawyers a little nervous about, hey, I don't want to do this. And we've had lawyers and law firms reach out and say, hey, would you guys agree to be named in some of our documents? And from a sort of limited perspective, we've tread a little bit into that, but haven't jumped feet first in it because it almost seems like the volume could be a little overwhelming.
I'm sure. I mean, I live with the administrator. I see how, they'll tell you as the attorney, oh yeah, I've got this. And they hang up and they call me up. They have no idea what they're getting into. They have no idea, how tough some businesses are. when you manage a $2 million estate, it's like managing a $2 million business. And
Right.
if you haven't done that, you don't know what it's about. And if you have done that, it's a lot of work. It's not, you don't run a business like that, easily. The people who do run it easily have done it for years and are experienced at it. So it just seems to me this is an area that the need is exploding. I don't see the supply catching up to it now. I would think with AI, it would be one of the jobs that can be maybe made more efficient. But you can't replace the human. Like the one job that cannot be written out by AI would be a fiduciary by definition, because you need a human being to make these decisions, right? So I'm really on a campaign to try to get more people to take a look at that as a career choice, because I know my clients need it, and you're saying the same thing. I think to some degree that your clients need it.
Yeah, I'm sure you're seeing it. I mean, if I'm seeing it on the East Coast and you're seeing it on the West, we know that the entire country is probably falling short on being able to offer that service. And for one reason or another, even as sort of regional banks used to do that, they're not sort of picking up and continuing that.
Well, they barely do checking accounts anymore. Regional banks. I mean, really, that was a time. I grew up in an area where like your local bank was like your local neighbor. You opened a passbook account with them. You knew who they were. They sponsored the Little League team. Nowadays, no offense, I know you're in North Carolina. No offense to North Carolina banking, but Bank America and some of these other companies are just, they're just taking our tax money, I think, and churning money and making billions of dollars. And they're really not in the business of serving customers. And, being an administrator of an estate or helping special needs as a trustee or power of attorney, these are very personal, complicated, difficult jobs. They're not simple.
Oh, they absolutely are. And it takes more than what, that you could really do to like a call center or something like that. I think you've got to know people a little better to operate in a lot of those roles.
Well, anybody who's out here watching this who happens to be a fiduciary and crosses multiple states, I love to interview for this podcast, because every time I think to some degree is looking for another person to be able to offer. I don't know necessarily that, like in Andrew's case, you would recommend somebody else, but you might at least give them a couple names to research on their own. I just don't think there's enough people in that industry to cover the need. So let's just talk about. We'll wrap up a little bit. Come forward looking. 2026, beginning of the year. Where do you see the economic of the industry of the practice of laws and estate planning, and what changes do you see in your practice? Let's say for this year.
I think a lot of things changed last year when the estate tax exemption amount federally jumped to 15.1 million permanently with an inflation adjustment on it. And so, it changed a lot of estate tax planning and made a lot of those things sort of not really all that necessary. Now, if you're in states that have an estate tax like California or some of the, northeastern states, then you still probably want to do some estate tax planning. But, that's where I think you really delve more into family dynamics and, family dynamics planning. That it doesn't mean because you don't have an estate tax that you no longer need a trust or anything like that.
Right.
So you start to get into what are our reasons for a trust? Are there family dynamic reasons for a trust? You have a special needs child in which you need to make sure assets are protected and the child can still get benefits like Medicaid, insurance and things like that. Or, family dynamics like a second marriage and those things. And so it becomes very sort of family driven, which is why, when we're doing planning, we start gathering a whole lot of information about somebody. And it almost seems intrusive for folks. They're like, why do you need all this personal information about my family? Well, that's because what the plan does is really based on what your whole sort of family situation is.
That's a whole another, demographic change that causes more need for estate planning also is instance of divorce has risen so much. remarriage, marriage with kids already. All those create potentially legal challenges that left unaddressed can rear their ugly heads. And I think I've seen estate wealth chewed up as much by litigation as by taxes. And so I think you're exactly right. These things are important to plan for.
Yeah. I mean, if you can think through all of that and prevent it from going, I mean, one of my partners does entirely estate and trust litigation. And if I can keep stuff out of her hands, the better off I've done for the family in trying to keep it from, thinking ahead. How much further ahead can we think and map out a plan that's clear.
When I was newer in this space, I used to look for attorneys who did both estate planning and litigation, feeling that the litigation would help you write better plans and avoid problems. I came to realize they're typically two different people, right? The person who's good at the estate plan tends to be much more personable, nurturative, because you have to dig deeper. Your effectiveness is the communication and relationship, whereas as litigation, your effectiveness is, I think, just not having a heart and claws and big teeth and all that. But it's just a different. My experience, a different personality. But having them in your firm, I think, is important. That way, you can talk to each other, hopefully at lunch, find out what's going on. If you have a problem, you can walk it across the hall. It's not like a different attorney. I think people feel abandoned when the attorney says, "I don't do litigation. You need to find another attorney." To me, that I always felt like that's not really serving your customer. That's serving your business, and in the long run, not effective. So it's interesting to hear that you say that. Well,
yeah,
look, I know
we've got 7 planners. Sorry to interrupt you. And we draft our own sort of base forms and documents together, and we meet quarterly to update those. And our litigator comes to those meetings because
beautiful.
She often says, "Hey, wait a minute! You may not want to put that clause in there."
Beautiful. Yeah, and you don't like it when she does that, I guess, in practice. On the other hand, you appreciate that she does it because you avoid having to bring the file over to her somewhere down the road, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, look, I know I've got a little longer than I'd planned. I really appreciate your time, Andrew, talking about estate planning, particularly elder focus and special needs. If you want more information, his contact information is below, and we also have a link to his website. It's MWB from McGuire Wood Bissett. NWBlawyers.com is the website. And if you switch on the attorneys, you'll see a picture of him all dressed up and looking sharp, ready to go to court. Andy, thank you so much for your time today, sharing with us about some of the key issues on special needs. And I hope anybody who has more questions in the area would feel free to reach out to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Bill. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Always. And for the rest of you, this is Estate Planning Weekly. We get together every week, usually with an estate planning attorney or vendor to help us be more effective in our work. If you have any questions, comments, if you think you should be interviewed, let me know. I'm always looking for great guests. You don't have to be as great as Andrew to be on the show, but love to get great guests. If I can help in any way, I'm at Bill Gross Probate on social media. As always, make today your best day ever. Thanks so much.